Chapter 9, Section 3, Theory of Plate Tectonics. During the 1950s and early 60s, scientists set up seismograph networks to see if enemy nations were testing atomic bombs. These seismographs also recorded all of the earthquakes around the planet. The seismic records could be used to locate an earthquake's epicenter, the point at which the Earth's surface directly above the place where the earthquake is occurring. We'll talk more about that in the next chapter. Earthquake epicenters outline the plates. Mid-ocean ridges, trenches, and large faults mark the edges of where the plates lie. This is where the majority of our earthquakes occur. The lithosphere is divided in a dozen major and several minor plates. The plates' edges can be drawn by connecting the dots that mark the earthquake's epicenters. A single plate can be made of all the ocean lithosphere or all continental lithosphere, but nearly all plates are made of a combination of both. The types of plate boundaries. In the theory of plate tectonics, Earth's lithospheric plates move slowly relative to each other, driven by convection currents in the mantle. The lithosphere is broken into several huge pieces that we call plates. Deep faults separate the different plates. There are three types of plate boundaries. Each plate contains a combination of each of the three types. Here we can see the pictures of the continents along with the crust. Relatively thick crust of the continents does not only include the regions above sea level, which in this picture is by orange, but the continental shelves in dark blue that lie beneath the shallow water. Here we can see if we put them all together like a jigsaw puzzle, that continental puzzle, we can see blocks of thick continental crust fitting nicely together along the edges of their shelves, forming that supercontinent called Pangaea. Plate boundaries are the edges where two plates meet. Most geologic activities, including volcanoes, earthquakes, and mountain building, take place at plate boundaries. How can two plates move relative to each other? There's several ways. A divergent plate boundary, also called a spreading center, is when two plates are moving away from one another. Convergent plate boundaries form when two plates are moving towards each other, they're converging together. And finally, transform fault boundaries are margins where two plates are slipping past each other. They're not producing or destroying any part of the lithosphere. This type of plate boundary and the type of crust found on each side of the boundary determines what type of geologic activity will be found there. Plates move apart at mid-ocean ridges where the seafloor forms. Between the two plates is what we call a rift valley. Lava flows at the surface will cool rapidly and be called basalt. But deeper in the crust, the magma cools more slowly to form a gabbro. So the entire ridge system is made up of igneous rock that is either extrusive or intrusive. Earthquakes are common at mid-ocean ridges since the movement of magma and oceanic crust results in crustal shaking. The vast majority of mid-ocean ridges are located deep below the sea. Can divergent plate boundaries occur within a continent? Of course they can. The result is intercontinental rifting, where magma rises beneath the continent, causing it to become thinner, break apart, and ultimately split. New ocean crust erupts in the void, creating an ocean between the continents. Here we can see that divergent boundary. The two plates are moving away from each other, and it's creating a rift valley. Convergent boundary, where these two plates are meeting. Remember that the oceanic crust is newer and softer, and so it will subduct underneath that older, harder continental crust. And finally, that transform fault boundary. We can see they're driving past each other in opposite directions. So they're not really creating or destroying any of the lithosphere. They're just shaking it up. Most divergent boundaries are spreading centers located along the crests of those mid-ocean ridges. Some spreading centers, however, occur on the continents. A continental rift is when the spreading centers develop within the continent. The landmass can split into two or more smaller segments, forming a rift. Here we can see the East African Rift Valley. The Arabian, Indian, and African plates are rifting or drifting apart, forming the Great Rift Valley in Africa. The Dead Sea is filling that rift with seawater. Here's another picture you can see of how it's growing. And if we're on the ground, this is what the Great Rift Valley looks like, the two sides. And we can see that valley spreading. And then there's the diagram. When two plates converge, the result depends on the type of lithosphere the plates are made of. No matter what, smashing two enormous slabs of lithosphere together will result in magma generation and earthquakes. Convergent boundaries produce features including trenches, volcanoes, and mountain ranges. A continental volcanic arc is a range of volcanic mountains produced in part by the subduction of that oceanic lithosphere as it subducts beneath the continental lithosphere. When two oceanic slabs converge, the resulting volcanic activity can build a chain of islands called a volcanic island arc. When two pieces of continental lithosphere collide, the two continents eventually merge, creating complex mountains. A subduction zone occurs when one oceanic plate is forced down into the mantle beneath a second plate. An oceanic to continental boundary is when denser oceanic slabs sinks into the asthenosphere. Pockets of magma will develop and rise. Continental volcanic arcs form part by volcanic activity caused by the subduction of oceanic lithosphere beneath a continent. Some examples of this include the Andes Mountains, the Cascades, and the Sierra Nevadas. Here we can see the Andes Mountains. This is one of the world's longest mountain changes. The sharp peaks tell us that this is a newer mountain range. The Cascades, it's a major mountain range on the western side of North America. You can see them if we were looking down from a satellite picture. This giant range of mountains in the Oregon, Washington, northern western corner of the country. And our Sierra Nevadas. These are found in the western North America. We find these mainly in California. And they're formed by that oceanic to continental convergence boundary. So that Pacific Ocean crust met the North American plate. It's subducted. When it gets down here, the friction, the intense temperature and pressure will melt that rock, and it will begin to rise in these pockets, causing warping and some uplift, creating this continental volcanic arc. We can see volcanoes forming. Some of them are dormant, some are still active. That trench we talked about in earlier sections, that oceanic trench is just forming at the edge of the oceanic crust and the other edge of the continental crust. Another type of convergent boundary is an oceanic to oceanic, where two oceanic slabs converge, one descends beneath the other. This kind of boundary often forms volcanoes on the ocean floor. Volcanic island arcs form as volcanoes emerge from the sea. Examples include the Aleutian Islands, Marianas Islands, and the Tonga Islands. Here's the Tonga Islands, just north of New Zealand and south of the equator. You can see how they form kind of in an arc. The Aleutian Islands, which are off the coast of Alaska, that little trail of islands. And then the Mariana Islands. This is found in the South Pacific, and these islands are formed in the exact same way. You can see that continental shelf, and we have oceanic to oceanic plates meeting to create these islands. So our convergent boundary we can see here, there's our trench. So the Marianas Trench would be one of these, where there's oceanic lithosphere and then a subducting oceanic lithosphere. Another type of convergent boundary is continental to continental. When subducting plates contain continental material, the two continents will collide, and this boundary can produce new mountain ranges such as the Himalayas. This image right here, you can really see where India collided with Asia and created those Himalayan mountains. Here we can see that suture, and you can see the upwarping of those metamorphic rocks that make up the mountains. Here's a model of what they believe happened 71 million years ago. India collided with Asia and created those Himalayan mountains where the two continental plates collided. A transform fault boundary, the final boundary we'll talk about, happens when plates grind past one another without destroying the lithosphere. Transform faults join two segments of a mid-ocean ridge. At the time of formation, they're roughly parallel to the direction of the plate movement. They aid in the movement of oceanic crustal material. Here we can see the fracture zone. We can see the transform fault, which is the active portion that's moving, and then the other fraction zone.